Ladies and gentlemen, today we are joined by Professor Razigan Maharaj, one of South Africa's respected voices on political economy, science, and innovation from a global South perspective. Dear friends, let me introduce our guest in a proper way because Professor Razigan Maharaj holds a rare mix of roles that cut across research, policy, and global advisory work. He serves as a chief director at Swanee University of Technology, is an associate research fellow at the Telus Institute in Boston, and is a member of the Academy of Science of South Africa. He also sits on the board of the Canon Collins Trust, mentors emerging leaders through Harvard Business School and the Russian State University for the Humanities, and represents the minister on the Council of Rhodes University. Earlier in his career, he helped shape South Africa's first democratic science and technology agenda as national coordinator of the ST Policy Transition Project. He went on to serve as head of policy at the CSIR and later as nodal head of the Center of Excellence in Scientometric and STI Policy, correct?
That's right.
Professor, welcome to our channel. We are very
Very
happy. So, long list
Yes.
of your roles. So, on Monday, December 15th, the Valdai Club in Moscow will host a discussion on the topic decolonization 65 years later. You will be giving a presentation there. I will definitely come to listen to you and other speakers. I have got my accreditation already.
Mhm.
So
Excellent.
it will be a nice discussion, I guess.
Mhm.
When we talk about colonization and decolonization, we most often refer to countries in Africa, and South Africa is maybe the most relevant example for this kind of discussions. Well, today, just
Mm.
today, the X platform's news feed once again brought up the topic of the expropriation of white-owned land uh,
Yeah.
in South Africa and constitutional changes, a topic, frankly speaking, that had almost been forgotten in media.
Hmm.
Once again, Elon Musk, South Africa's most famous figure, I suppose, added fuel to the fire of controversy by leaving his comment. Let me ask you my first question.
Mhm.
If the issue of whites and blacks is causing such a strong reaction, can we say that South Africa has successfully moved on from its colonial past, or is it shadow still present in the country?
Thanks very much, Anastasia, and thanks for including me in this discussion itself. Yeah. I want to, with your permission, return to the question of whether the person called Elon Musk is actually the most famous South African. But like I'm saying, let's get to that, lest I be accused of being racist myself. I think there are much more famous people from South Africa who have contributed to world peace and have actually won Nobel Peace Prizes from South Africa, none of whom are associated with the character of Elon Musk. But to the question itself, and this is very important because it is topical and people are engaging on it, I think it's important for us to actually place a bit of context into how we approach the issue itself.
Please.
So, the territory of southern Africa has a long history of human occupation. The United Nations recognizes South Africa as a World Heritage Site, and UNESCO has given South Africa the credit of being a cradle of humankind. So, notwithstanding the availability of such empirical data, confirming that the first human occupation of South Africa stretches back millions of years, when we coexisted with early hominin forms, and now anatomically modern human beings arrived about 125,000 years ago. The narrative account of South Africa remains largely tied to the arrival of European settlers who apparently discovered the territory in 1488. That's timing in our common era. But I'd encourage people to do the math. In essence, therefore, at least 123,512 years of human occupation of South Africa is excluded from the history books. The colonial capture of the territory by the private Dutch East Indies Company in 1652 was heroically resisted, although it was in vain. So from a refreshment station, which was meant to serve or support European trade with Asia around Africa, the territory would experience induced social transformation, which included elements of feudalism, slavery, settler colonialism, racial capitalism, which reached its highest form of praxis in the doctrine of apartheid, which was formulated in 1948, and which eventually collapsed at the end of the 1980s as the struggle for national liberation rendered the country ungovernable. So the democratic breakthrough of 1994 ushered in a post-apartheid regime, which sought to redress the inherited legacies of apartheid by deracializing capitalism and reconstructing and developing a fully enfranchised, non-sexist, non-racial, and united South Africa. However, all of this was meant to take place without confronting the inordinate legacy of 342 years of expropriation, of extraction, and exploitation. So South Africa sought to reform as opposed to transform the socio-economy, whilst the political economy, the relations underpinning the ownership structure of the country, remained largely intact. And so that's what contributes to, right up to this week, in fact, South Africa receiving a report from the IMF and the World Bank that it is currently the world's most unequal country. This is 31 years since our democratic breakthrough itself. So, Anastasia, it's not so much a shadow, but it's an objectively verifiable fact that the inequality persists. It's manifest in racialized, engendered, and even geospatial formats. In other words, your distance from an urban center defines the level of inequality you're exposed to. Whether you are categorized as being a man or a woman also contributes to that. And then, because of how we understood, note I use that in the past tense, understood racialization and the categories that followed it, we end up with black and white being framed in the way in which they are. I hope this provides us with that deeper context to understand and, in fact, expose the nonsense that's being paraded by people such as Elon Musk, etc. Why? Because it goes completely against science. How is it that you can frame that white-owned territory is being confiscated when no questions are asked how it is that a so-called, because there's no other way we can describe it, white person came to own the territory in Black Africa? If we refuse to answer that question, how then do we then frame it as something that is illegitimate or unjust? South Africa has undergone massive processes to ensure that those that live in South Africa, both black and white, have rights that are protected constitutionally. And to date, we have no evidence of any form of genocide being perpetuated in South Africa. We have evidence of genocide emerging far north of us in the Democratic Republic of Congo, in Rwanda, in Burundi, in Sudan, and in West Asia, specifically in Palestine. Those are the examples of real genocide that have been attested to and proven with evidence in court. None of that exists in South Africa or, for that matter, Southern Africa.
Thank you. Thank you very much for clarification. Because the question of white lenders, white owners rises from time to time, and it brings a lot of buzz of the mass media.
Mm,
Well, we know it's wrong to talk about Africa as a single entity because it is
of course.
it's not. This continent is
Yeah.
so large and so heterogeneous. But
Mm,
continuing the theme of decolonization,
mm,
I cannot help but mention the recent events in Benin.
mm.
Can you help us understand what is going on in that part of Africa?
Yes. So, Anastasia, as you correctly point out, Africa is vast. And because of its vastness, we have to also accept we have an uneven distribution, even of information on the continent itself. Yeah. So, what I share with you with humility is only premised upon the information I've had access to. And so I will even cite some of the sources so that we get a sense this isn't me sitting in South Africa imagining what's happening, but rather being informed from reports from Benin itself. And one of the reports that I found most useful was a statement issued by the Communist Party of Benin, which basically argued that the December 7th coup attempt was the logical consequence of the disastrous management of what they characterize as a rupture government, which they say was characterized by predation, fascist dictatorship, exclusion, and repeated institutional coup d'etats since 2016. So while people are criticizing the involvement of French and Nigerian military assets in neutralizing the coup attempt, the Communist Party of Benin argued that it constituted an insult and humiliation to the political and military institutions of their country. And basically, they argue it implied the placement of their country under supervision, a pure and simple transformation of Benin into a French colony. So I pay a lot of attention to what the peoples of Benin are saying about this. But it's also important, they are reminding us really about the warnings issued by a famous psychologist, Frantz Fanon, about the incomplete liberation process, where we should have been advancing a new humanism which was meant to represent a radical redefinition of humanity beyond colonialism, capitalism, and racism. At a global level, we can now see how clearly segregated we are through uneven and combined development. Whilst world system shows that core capitalist economies continue to dictate circumstances and possibilities for those designated as peripheral and semi peripheral. So, even though in world systems at least, our understanding of the countries in the voluntary association of BRICS Plus represent the leading economies in a semi peripheral relationship with core capitalist economies. Even there, we remain under threat. And it shows the continued dominance and a dominance largely also maintained through militarized interventions. And this is something that we really need to pay much more attention to. You know, if we look at how organizations are defining what's taking place in Benin, it's quite apparent that there was a need, was and is a need for an internal, a domestic discussion inside Benin about the quality of their governance apparatus. That is something that the peoples of Benin should be responsible for and held accountable for. In my mind, I cannot understand either Nigeria, which may be closer, or France, which is far off our continent, needing or having the right to intervene itself. This is something that should not and will not be accepted by the peoples of Africa.
Yes, but nevertheless, we don't know exactly because the information is various. According to one sources, so we may say that Nigerian authorities
Hmm.
were asked by France
The French
to send
president.
their
Yeah.
troops.
Hmm.
Other sources said after consultations with Paris, the government of Benin asked again a Nigerian army to come in. So all that, it seems like all that ex-French colonies, I don't know, despite their official independence, are still dependent.
Remind myself as well. 1966-67, Kwame Nkrumah wrote a book called Neocolonialism. So this is before Ghana actually embraced full post-colonial development. And the warning signs were there already. I think we have much to gain from learning from the experiences of West Africa, and particularly the AES that has been established. It cannot be that institutions such as ECOWAS continue to operate in the format in which they were set up to, when they no longer have the, if you'd call it, legitimacy of popular support from all the countries of the region. It cannot be that they operate on the basis of a few of the countries. You see, there's an element of how we can say equity between the countries. Nigeria is huge as a territory and as a block of people. In fact, 1 in 4 of us Africans is Nigerian, as an example. So that gives you a sense of scale. This in no way means that Nigeria has any extra rights relative to any other post colonial territory that achieved its national liberation. So, towards that end, it cannot be that an African country called on a European country to intervene in Africa in any way whatsoever. We have sufficient means and resources amongst the countries of Africa to resolve the issues. And this is also, I think, a major lesson coming from the heroic efforts of people such as the General Terror and others in West Africa, that they themselves are now forging maybe a better escape route from the entrenchment of colonial relations by freeing themselves also from both economic, social, political, but very importantly, intellectual capture. Yes.
Mentally.
Yes. And this is becoming so important that the confidence of the young people, especially of Africa, come through. We are a continent of young people, whether the world system is willing to acknowledge it or not. The future of the world is African. Towards that end, the better that we improve the material conditions prevalent in Africa, the better it is for us all. And that's something maybe is difficult for those that have achieved their privilege on the basis of a negative relationship, such as France, such as all the old colonial powers, and now especially the dying empire of the USA.
Dying empire. Okay. Well, let's pause for a moment on Nigeria, because
Mhm,
Nigeria, a
mhm,
BRICS partner country,
mhm,
that recently declared to aim to become a full member country, full member of the group, I mean.
mm,
But not long ago, Donald Trump himself accused the country's authorities of facilitating the persecution of Christians and even threatened to send troops to Nigeria, despite the government and Christian organizations claiming that no such
mm.
persecution was taking place.
Good place. Yeah.
So, what is your view on the US position in this
Mm.
issue?
So I want to preface Anastasia.
Sorry,
Sorry.
I will add, it's very reminiscent of the accusations of the oppression of white landowners in your country, in South
Yes.
Africa.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I'm laughing more out of stress rather than finding it humorous, I should say. Yeah, the reason being also, when the statement was originally made, I was actually at a conference and I was having breakfast with an academic from Nigeria. And she was explaining to me that she cannot understand what they are talking about. Here's someone who's been teaching in education. She knows the country very well. She can tell me there are concentrations of people who ascribe to a Christian faith, there are those that are Islamic, and there's a range of other spiritual followings in Nigeria itself. But in no way did she say, can you describe any territory as being Christian or being Muslim, because this is the result of a historical evolution over time, and the impact of various religions on the space itself. I think something, Anastasia, which is absolutely clear by now, is that the Trump regime does not determine its policies, its strategies, and even its tactics on the basis of evidence or empirical facts. I want to maybe even tease and ask, maybe we should ask the Department of State to spell the word empirical. I'm teasing because it'll come back as empire. Rather, the views of the Trump regime merely perpetuate narrow, chauvinistic, and in large, patriarchal worldviews, that merely reproduce narratives now long debunked by science and intelligence. Uh, and by intelligence, I don't only mean the security structures, I mean our own organic ability to make sense of the world. There is very few places in the world where you could make a statement on the basis of racialization, which has no basis in science itself. Yeah. So for those that study human and social behavior, we have witnessed how those from South America, Africa, and Asia are victims of a special form of vitriol, while those, and as we heard from Trump himself just a few nights ago, especially if you come from Northern Europe, are viewed much more favorably. So not even the whole of Europe anymore, but specifically the northern territories of Europe itself. Yeah. So they get this favorable. But empire is declining, notwithstanding how much you call it a replacement or anything. None of these are science based issues. These are social determinations through which you whip up popular support for ideas that cannot stand up in a lecture room, let alone be published as a thesis itself. But the militarization and a complete disregard for any rules based order, I think, is increasingly showing the world that the USA, as currently constituted, represents a significant threat to all of humanity, not just the territories it is pointing to. So I raise this as well, Anastasia, because you're correct. He did try this first with South Africa, and by saying, no, this is Elon Musk's view, or maybe former golf players who are now resident in
Yeah.
racist Mar-a-Lago, this does not in any way change what is empirically verifiable. So there's facts, and it can always be checked against it. We also need to be quite careful, especially the BRICS Plus, and all progressive formations represent multipolarity that's emerging. We also advance a sense of polycentrism, in other words, where we move away from a single norm defining us all. In other words, we accept and embrace our pluralities as a positive attribute of our humanity. This is our future. I mean, we can just see it. Climate change is accelerating towards us. If we seek to be a monocrop, we will be wiped out in the first great drought. I tease about that because sometimes I believe we do act like more like vegetables than animals. But notwithstanding that, maybe should we take the time to actually think about our circumstances, we also have to accept our biological adaptations, which give us these different characteristics, hues of skin color, the amount of melanin we host, etc. These are positive attributes towards our survival on the planet. These are nothing negative. And as a consequence, we need to know how to not only nurture them, but probably how to value them at a higher level as well. We all know what happens with inbreeding. We've seen the consequences of it. I think if you look to the west of Asia, you'd see many remnants of this in dynastical form. But this is not necessarily a form of improved intelligence or social capacity. So, as a consequence of it, I think we must be much more clear about the diversities that we require. If someone argues that someone is being the victim, provide the evidence. We have instruments and institutions through which such can be prosecuted. But I mean, I'm sure all of the listeners and people who are watching this would also admit If you withdraw from the very fora where facts are tested, such as the International Court, you have to ask, on what basis do you provide your assumption of fact to be true? Yeah, and this is something I really also would encourage. We need more of the world outside of Africa to stand up on behalf of Africa because it affects us all. It's not an issue that we as Africans have to respond to. Racism is something that captures us all. And I'm raising that in that form itself because for us to be truly non-racial, we have to adopt an anti-racist position. In other words, we cannot tolerate or accept racism at all. And that's the basis upon which it may be called Christian today, but we don't know what it will be called tomorrow, just as the basis of a need for an excuse to intervene.
Like it was, for example, for Russian musicians or athletes.
Hmm. Absolutely. And you
They
see,
are not
as you
allowed
raise,
to participate in international competition. They are not allowed to participate in international musical context because they are Russians. That's it.
yes, but
This is
well,
the word racist. Racism.
well, it's more than racist, I would say. It also runs against facts. I mean, the extent to which, as you correctly point out, we've seen this direct action against people holding Russian passports. We've not seen the same against those actually killing children in Gaza today. We have
Yeah.
their names, you know their identities, yet they are allowed to participate not only in sporting competitions, but apparently also in contests where they sing really bad songs. So
Yeah.
I'd make
Highly
that
involved in political life of entire world.
exactly. Yeah.
Thank you for your position.
Mm,
But when while US pushes this kind of agenda on the other side of the world, things are moving differently.
mm,
Let's talk about China.
mm,
China's interest in African continent is growing from year to year. We see it. Chinese firms are opening new markets for themselves,
mm,
and African countries, African people have recognized a different approach to running business from Chinese companies compared to European or American entities.
mhm, mhm.
Recently, Africa's largest bank was connected to Chinese payment messaging system. So
Yeah.
they declare that payments will be made in national currencies.
Yeah.
So we know it's when they say about national currencies, they say about yuan,
Hmm.
but thereby yuan weakening the US dollar position. So, in your opinion, I don't know how to say it better. The African continent will inevitably become a battleground between the West and the East. How do you think? And how will this affect the country and people themselves?
Now, the reason again I smile is again on a negative basis, the smile itself. Why? Because we've come from a long history again, Anastasia, where what people call the Cold War was very hot for us in Africa. We actually saw lives being lost in the various conflicts taking place. And the battlefields were in Angola and elsewhere. Our own liberation is a consequence of the resolution of one of the Cold War battles that took place in Africa, a proxy between the United States of America and the Soviet Union. With the huge Cuban support, South the majority of peoples of South Africa were able to offset the apartheid regime and the United States of America at a famous battle in Carnival, which saw then America withdraw. So that's a part of the history that we have. The second point is also quite important, which is that the link between China and Africa is not something constituted, if you'd call it, post the Second World War. The reason being, Africa and China have a common border, which is the Indian Ocean. we have significant evidence of Chinese and African collaboration, including Indian collaboration, extending at least into the first millennium of of our common era itself. So there's a long history. This history doesn't appear in the texts which prejudice in favor of the Atlantic, slavery, and those ways in which Africa was exploited. Yeah. So I make this point, and I think there's something quite important in it. Around 1400, yeah, the year 1400 of the Common Era, you have a giraffe in a zoo in what is today Beijing. Anastasia, that giraffe did not walk from South Africa to China. It was transported by ship. We've got portions of ceramics, a whole range of pieces that bring our history together. Since the national liberation of China in the 1950s, there has also been a phenomenal amount of Afro-Sino collaboration. This is from Tanzania across all of those African countries that chose a non-capitalist path to development. Not all of them succeeded, but you do have elements of collaboration and cooperation between the peoples of China, very much like the peoples of Russia, and the other states that constituted the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Important noting that as well, that have strong links with the peoples of Africa. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, Anastasia, the largest alumni group that's for African people with postgraduate degrees would find its source being the USSR, specifically the People's Friendship University in Moscow itself, as an example. So this is the richness that we need to be bringing back into the discourse itself. It's not as if China is a new entrant. China has been here with Africans, also fighting against dependency, against all the negative attributes of uneven and combined development. We must also remember the role played by China in the establishment of the non-aligned movement in Bandung. Again, I hope this is creating this picture that we have a much richer history with both the People's Republic of China as well as the Russian Federation, based on our historical links over time. This often doesn't appear in the Atlantic rendition of what took place. Yeah. So in that framing, I'm sure you'd also realize maybe we need to be careful about making this a East versus West. Yeah, because Africa is in the middle, at least in terms of how we see some of the planet. I tease about that as well. But the point being around it, Africa is the source of all of humanity. Let's use that rather as a starting point. Africa's historic marginalization and exclusion from world systems has had huge negative effects, mainly experienced by the peoples in Africa itself. Yeah? People often have raised the issue, especially around new technologies such as digitization, automation, artificial intelligence, all these new things. And then an argument is made, Africa never participated in the first industrial revolution, second industrial, third industrial, fourth. If I'm not mistaken, the Chinese are suggesting we're in the sixth at present. According to the Japanese or some scientists in Japan, we may be in the eighth. There's a range of these things, but I think we can conform. Without the labor, without the expropriation, exploitation, and extraction from Africa, none of these revolutions elsewhere, especially in terms of improving productive capabilities, capacities, and competences, would have been possible. In a similar way, and this ties in with Valda's discussion next week, it's important to remember that the profits accumulated through those processes is the very same capital we today are begging for to redress our indebtedness. This is something that we really cannot allow to continue intergenerationally. So, in this framing, you mentioned specifically Africa's largest bank. So, the two main shareholders in the bank, and is it all right to name it, Anastasia?
I don't know who are them.
No, I'm asking the question. I'm sorry. I don't know whether it's tolerated to name the institution.
Ah,
It's called, it's Standard Bank because it's public knowledge. Standard Bank of South Africa has a 20% ownership from China, and the second largest ownership block is South African public servants. In other words, it's mine and other pensions that co-own Standard Bank. That's what gives it its scale as well. And so what Standard Bank is doing is very much following the guidelines established through the BRICS Plus, which in essence advantage. Very important point. It's not anti-dollar. It's pro us using our own currencies. The
Exactly.
fact that privilege of the dollar will fall away naturally because China is the largest trade partner for all of Africa. We have to ask ourselves, what benefit can anyone in Lesotho gain from having to buy a dollar to pay a renminbi's worth of value, or a ruble's worth of value, or a real's worth of value, or for that matter, a rand? Again, if you notice, the original BRICS countries have a common a letter for their currencies, which is the letter R. Just as an example, there can be other ways in which we can frame this. We do not need to be trapped inside the Bretton Woods arrangements that were there, particularly to maintain and expand the system as it existed in World War II, that were redefined with America's withdrawal from the gold standard and what happened from the 1970s onwards. It's really important that we recalibrate, reset the system in that way. The dollar's position will weaken as we ask ourselves, do we need to purchase anything from the USA? If we continue to be hit with the type of tariff structures, etc., I'm sure people will find cheaper and more appropriate or relevant substitutes. In that context, the demand for the dollar will fall, and with the falling demand for the dollar, its value and privileges that accumulated to the USA will hopefully disappear as well. This may enable then, and I really hope it works out in this way itself, the type of confidence that allows each country to develop based on its own asset base, its own resources, its capacity to mobilize these to improve the quality of life of its residents and citizenry, should be of paramount importance, not in terms of your level of repaying your debts on time, so that the capital that was stolen originally continues to accumulate in European banks.
I see. Thank you very much. Thank you, really. Thank you very much for your vision. Well, Africa is seen mostly as a source of resources, we may say. And in Europe, they say, we are coming here to take your resources, and in change, something we will give you. Something.
Mm,
Chinese, and they say Chinese will do the same. But China
mm,
has a different approach.
mm,
They never say, we are coming to your land, taking your resources, and then see you later. No, they have win-win approach. So they
mhm,
are constructing something together with the
mm.
country. So that's why I meant
Right. Anastasia, you're absolutely
maybe
correct.
a battlefield, because European countries, America, the United
Mm.
States of
No, I
America, and
understand. No, you're absolutely correct in also reminding us of that difference itself. But I was hoping to also share with you the fact that it has a longer history. It's not a history that starts now. It doesn't start with the decline of the US empire. It starts because of our links around an ocean, and that gave us a very different historical integration project. This preceded the globalization that follows through voyages of so called discovery, and we saw what happened after that. So, that basis, which establishes a kind of common humanity, now finds resonance and is manifest in many of People's Republic of China's public statements about global development. The notion of a shared humanity, a common destiny, arise from it. And these are elements we really need to pay much more attention to. Anastasia, if you don't mind, the most vivid example of this is when COVID-19 attacked us. It was a virus. In other words, it's not the same life form as us as a species. It attacked us as a species. Waving your passport at COVID 19 did not give you an immune system. Yes. So, as a consequence, we've got to come to learn as we encroach further and further into ecological precarity. There's much more that we need to do together that demands the type of collaboration and cooperation, basically led by Chinese and African and Asian countries, in reconstituting their development for the needs of their citizenry. If we all did that, then in common we have much more to share, as opposed to the fact that all of us in Africa were left sharing a single dose of the vaccine, whereas people in the highly advanced mature capitalist economies, specifically the USA, Europe, and Japan, had at least 6, if not 8 doses available per citizen. You only needed one, by the way.
Well, Professor, thank you very much for your enlightening vision. Our time is unfortunately is over for our recording for our session today. I would be very glad to see you again and again on our channel.
Excellent. Thanks for the
And
invitation.
I hope our viewers enjoyed today's discussion, and they will leave their questions to you. That I hope you will
Mhm.
get my invitation one more time to join the discussion and reply the questions of our viewers, because I'm sure there will be lots of them.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Anastasia. Thanks also for allowing a voice from the far deeper south to be
Deeper south.
articulated.
You know that now that's another term, not
Mm.
global south, but global majority.
Absolutely. I share that perspective. Thank you very
Global
much.
majority. So
Yes.
the voice of global majority is here. Thank you so
Excellent.
much. Thank you very much. Dear viewers, I hope you enjoyed today's discussion. And for more, please subscribe to Think BRICS. Thanks for watching.